This evening, I'm going to start speaking about something that is interesting, that is very much a Jewish thing, and that is the 13 attributes of God. And the 13 attributes of God are the 13 things that God says about himself when he passes by Moses after he tucked him into the cleft in the rock, in a way as a prototype of his bride, because his bride was born out of his side when the spear was put into his side and blood and water flowed out, because the life of an animal is in the blood. And the eighth attribute of Elohim is Rav Emet. Emet is truth. I, Yudei Vaveh, am truthful and faithful in carrying out promises. Yeshua promises that his Father will always provide for his children, and he states that the Father will faithfully keep all of his promises. Therefore, I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, about your body, what you will wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds flying about. They neither plant nor harvest, nor do they gather food into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth more than they? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to his life? So he says, don't worry about what you eat or drink, because he is truthful and faithful. So he's actually following these 13 attributes of his Father to the greatest degree. He expounded this so well that I don't really think we need to talk about this any further, because he's absolutely truthful in everything. Then continuing with this, and why be anxious about clothing? Think about the fields of wild irises and how they grow. They neither work nor spin thread. Yes, I tell you that not even Shlomo, Solomon, in all his glory was clothed as beautiful as one of these. If this is how Elohim clothes grass in the field, which is there today and gone tomorrow, thrown in an oven, how much more will he clothe you? What little trust you have. So don't be anxious asking what will we eat, what will we drink, and how will we be clothed, because the Father in heaven knows those things, and he will provide for us. He will faithfully keep all of his promises. The ninth attribute is not netzer chesed la'alafim. Now, what is this? This is Yudei Vaveh, retain loving kindness for thousands of generations, taking into account the merit of our worthy ancestors, Zechut Avot, in his judgment over people. So this means that when he judges us, he judges with loving kindness, and he takes into account the merit of the fathers. Now, the merit of the fathers, the way in which he takes that into account is because the merit of the fathers becomes our own merit, because they teach us how to live. And this is part of honoring our father and our mother. Because when we love as our fathers and our mothers, we become in generations. We then actually show what he has shown. And what does Yeshua say? He says, don't judge so that you won't be judged. For the way you judge others is how you will be judged. The measure with which you measure out will be used to measure to you. Why do you see the splinter in your brother's eye but not notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the splinter out of your eye, when you have a log in your own? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly so that you can remove the splinter from your brother's eye. This has everything to do with what the word judge means. Judgment is public action. A judge proclaims something publicly, and he proclaims that someone is guilty. A person who proclaims another person's guilt publicly is judging and is gossiping. And he expects us to judge favorably. So when something that someone else does falls on us unfavorably, he asks us to stand still for a while, to have a look at what happened, and then to find the most favorable judgment for what has been happened that we can possibly find. Because then we can expect that others will judge us favorably as well. And this no longer has to do with judgment. This now has to do with discernment. So we discern what another person has done, and then we to that person and speak to that person about what he has done, so that it will be favorable judgment. Matthew 7 verse 6 and 7 verse 15 to 20, however, he insists on judgment. And what he is saying here, he is saying that when you see the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye, it actually means that the majority of what we see other people doing wrong, we probably are doing wrong exactly the same. So we're doing what the other people are doing wrong, and we're very sensitive about what they do, but we don't see what we are doing, and therefore we are hypocrites. Because we should first fix up what we are doing to other people before we start judging them about what they do. So he says, fix up your own side of the court before you address the other side. And it should not be by human principles and superficial judgment. He's actually saying the judgment that you make, or the discernment you make, must be made on the basis of the person's character and his personality. And when we judge on character, then, and not on deeds, we will see the good that there is in a person, and we will realize that the person probably is not wanting to do something badly, and therefore we need to go and sort it out with that person privately and not make a judgment that becomes public. And we must judge favorably and apply the same measure to those who we judge. The 10th attribute is nosei avon. Now, nosei avon is he will forgive iniquity, wrongful deeds committed with premeditation. So when someone does something on purpose, he will forgive that, and we are to forgive that. And he says, I carry iniquity away for the penitent. So those who see their wrong deeds and are penitent, he will take the wrong deeds away for. So when we see our brother doing wrong, then we first must see whether we are doing the same wrongs, sort that out. And then we will be able to remove the splinter from our brother's eye. So we will be able to help him with what he is doing wrong. But then we will also know that a splinter in the eye is a very, 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 very painful thing. And you must first remove the log from your eye, which probably will be less painful than to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. Then you will be able to do the fine job of removing the splinter from your brother's eye, because then you will be removing it with loving kindness. And that actually means that his favorable judgment also always seeks the most favorable attitude possible to others. The 11th attribute is nosei pesha. So he forgives the transgressions that are committed in a rebellious spirit. The interesting thing about this rebellious spirit and pesha is part of what is loaded onto the scapegoat and is chased into the desert. Because rebellion that is not forgiven send you in the direction of Satan and along with Satan as the scapegoat. Then, along with this, Yeshua says, don't give to dogs what is holy. Don't throw your pearls to the pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and then turn and attack you. Now, one needs to understand what this means. What is a dog? Dogs are driven by their instincts or lusts. Those who are driven by their lusts do not appreciate what is set apart or what is holy. Those who are driven by their lusts don't discuss the finer matters of the gospel with them. It has no use whatsoever. They need to be confronted with their wrongdoing in a loving way so that they will turn on them. We need to be dog whisperers to those who are driven by their lusts, because they do not appreciate what is holy. Pigs are interesting, because what are pigs? Pigs' split hooves belie their lack of rumination, which makes them unclean, and therefore they are a picture of hypocrisy. Because you see, they don't ruminate, and therefore they're unclean. But if you look at them, their hooves are split, and therefore they seem to be clean. And therefore, pigs are a symbol of hypocrisy. Now, if we go back to the statement of do not give to the dogs what is holy, do not give to those who are driven by their lusts, the magnificent things of faith, because they will have no value to them. Do not give what is valuable of faith to the pigs, because they don't know these things and cannot appreciate them, because they are hypocrites. So hypocrites do not appreciate the preciousness of righteousness, and therefore it has no value. But Yudei Vavhe will forgive the hypocrites and those driven by lust if they come to faith and if they turn to him. The 12th attribute is Nosei Chata'ah. Now, Nosei Chata'ah is I Yudei Vavhe, forgive the sin, defined as those wrongful deeds that were inadvertently committed. How are we to know about these things that are inadvertently committed? When he parallels that in what he says in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, keep asking, it will be given to you. Keep seeking and you will find. Keep knocking and the door will open to you. For everyone who keeps asking receives, who keeps seeking finds, and to him whom he keeps knocking, the door will be opened. And when you see this parallelity to sins that are committed inadvertently, it means that he will give it to us. He will show us these inadvertent sins if we keep on coming back to him. And through his Spirit, he will actually reveal these sins to us. And then he says, is there anyone who, if his son asks him for a loaf of bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? So if you, even though you are bad, know how to give your children gifts that are good, how much more will your Father in heaven keep giving good things to those who keep asking him? Because he will actually show them these sins that are inadvertently committed. And always treat others as you would like them to treat you, because that sums up the teaching of the Torah and the prophets, the teaching of the Tanakh. The most important ongoing need of all flesh is continued forgiveness. And receiving this forgiveness is an issue of perpetual communication. Receiving forgiveness and receiving sustenance from him. Forgiving inadvertent wrongful deeds is spiritual sustenance for all relationships. Where we must forgive it, we must also reveal it. And we must actually forgive it before we reveal it. The promise Yeshua has made here will be physical and spiritual sustenance as a result of this communication. Bread and fish. Doing it for others is what Yudhevave does to all, so that people will see him in the words and deeds of believers. Go in through the narrow gate, for the gate that leads to destruction is wide and the road broad, and many travel it. But it is a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life, and only a few find it, because they continue asking him to reveal their iniquity to them. Living these principles is not easy, but it leads to life. It is the way to Mashiach. Living the life by them leads to forgiveness of inadvertent sin. All continually commit inadvertent sin, but he forgives. And then the 13th attribute is Nakeh. The 13th attribute is, I will not cancel punishment, and I will clear guilt for those who genuinely return to me in Teshuvah. Teshuvah is repentance, Tshuva, to return to him in repentance. He will cancel all guilt, and he actually has stated that from the beginning. And against this, he says, beware of the false prophets. They come to you wearing sheep's clothing, but underneath they are hungry wolves. You will recognize them by their fruit. Can people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every healthy tree produces good fruit, but a poor tree produces bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, or a poor tree good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. So you will recognize them by their fruit. Those who deal with their sin and their iniquity will be recognized by their fruit. And this actually means that those who do not turn from their sin and iniquity will be living in them, and they cannot possibly be prophets, because a prophet is someone who knows and does the laws, also the law of the Spirit. And therefore these false prophets are a sign that people are not living what they should be doing. They display their flesh in their actions, and that is the way to know them, who they are and what is born out of them. It is fruit of those who are inwardly that God expects. Those who live the 10 words and the 13 attributes of God are true prophets, because when they will speak the truth. Transgressing the Beatitudes and the dictates of the 10 words, displaying any other attribute than the 13 attributes of Elohim, is to be lost. It's unacceptable fruit and should lead to action. And those people cannot walk as leaders if they fall in these things. Now, the interesting thing is, so everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible man who built his house on bedrock. The rain fell, the rivers flooded, the winds blew and beat against that house, but it didn't collapse because its foundation was on rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a stupid man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the rivers flooded, the wind blew and beat against that house, and it collapsed. And its collapse was horrendous. Those living in a solid house is the reward of those who continuously return to him in Teshuvah, who continuously return from their sin. Now, some interesting things happen here. Yeshua, before the Sermon on the Mount, was immersed by Yochanan, John the Baptist. He fasted 40 days and was led into temptation by Hasatan. He chose his disciples and he went up the mountain to preach the sermon. Just check. Moses had been prepared by Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in the desert for 40 years, as you know. He fasted 40 days when he went up the mountain. He went to fetch the Torah. When he went up the mountain, well, he went up and down the mountain 7 times to fetch the Torah. He received the 10 words and he heard the 13 attributes when he saw Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Yeshua, seeing the crowds, Yeshua walked up the hill. After he sat down, his Talmudim or his disciples came to him. So he went up the mountain. After Yeshua had come down from the hill, large crowds followed him. When Yeshua had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at the way he taught, for he was not instructing them like their Torah teachers, but as one who had authority himself. So this is starting to say that he is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh because he has authority himself. And this alludes to something that Moses said in Deuteronomy 18, 18 and 19. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from amongst their kinsmen. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I order him. Whoever doesn't listen to my words, which he will speak in my name, will have to account for himself to me. Yeshua says, everyone who does this has a house that is built on bedrock. Everyone who does not has a house that is built on sand. So he's a prophet like Moshe, and much, much more. So what do we say of the 13 attributes and the 10 words? They're impossible to keep. Own effort is just nothing else than legalism. The Ruach enables us to keep them. The Ruach destroys the flesh. It is a carnal effort to keep the law that is being destroyed, because that is what he does. He actually empowers us to keep the law. Now, the question is, what is the truth? We are called to love each other, empowered by Ruach HaKodesh. We are called to obey the law by the power of the Spirit. The Spirit defines the truth. When the Ruach identifies truth, it is always with the power of love. And these are the attributes that are necessary to keep the first 3 words.
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will not cancel punishment, but he will remove my guilt. Now, that sounds to me, as though I will still be punished even though I'm no longer guilty.
No, what it says, that he will remove guilt for those who return to him in Teshuvah. That means those who acknowledge their sin.
No, I think that God does punish us. I think that because he loves us, there is something, I'm not sure where it is in the New Testament, but later on in the letters, it says that God disciplines us so that we should not be judged with the world. So I think that when we have sinned, God has to discipline us to show us how this must be undone in our lives and to show us that there is a price to pay. Even though Christ has paid the price, we need to be disciplined like beloved children so that we learn holiness. Jesus learned holiness, although he didn't need to, but we have to learn holiness as well as having it conferred on us by Christ. And so he does discipline us for the things we have done wrong. We do pay the consequences of our sins in some measure in this life, but we do not pay the final price of losing eternal life. We actually still are counted amongst his body, his bride.
Well, the thing that he does through his Spirit is he reverses the effects of our undisciplined actions for us. Because he comes and he convinces us of sin, of righteousness, and of judgment. And obviously, if I have sinned, there are going to be consequences. But he will also forgive. He will forgive those sins if we return to him in repentance. It does not matter whether it is rebellion or whether it is sins committed intentionally or sins committed without intent. He will forgive all of that for us. But what he expects of us is the acknowledgement of our sin. Because that is the one thing that he did not get out of Adam. Adam did not acknowledge his sin. He blamed Eve. And Eve blamed the snake. So blame shifting is a strict no-no. We need to take accountability for what we have done. And he will forgive us if we do that. And he will even reverse some of the effects of our sin if we return to him and ask forgiveness. It also is true that if we ask forgiveness of people, they will also reverse some of the effects of sin from us.
The whole chapter 12, but verse 9 and 10. And if you look just at verse 9 and 10 and even 11, then you will see the way of the discipline and what the discipline leads us unto, which actually would then result in a lot of joy. So it's Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 9, 10, and 11.
Furthermore, we had physical fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. How much more should we submit to our spiritual Father and live? For they disciplined us only for a short time and only as best they could. But he disciplines us in a way that provides genuine benefit to us and enables us to share in his holiness. In other words, in a way where we can get rid of our sin. Now, all discipline, whilst it is happening, does indeed seem painful, not enjoyable. But for those who have been trained by it, it later produces its peaceful fruit, which is righteousness. 2 Timothy 3, and let's have a look at the first 5 verses of this. Moreover, understand this, in the Acharit HaYamim, the last days will come trying times. People will be self-loving, money-loving, proud, arrogant, insulting, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, uncontrolled, brutal, hateful of good, traitorous, headstrong, swollen with conceit, loving pleasure rather than Elohim. As they retain the outer form of religion but deny its power, stay away from these people. For some of them worm their ways into homes and get control of weak-willed women who are heaped with sins and swayed by various impulses, who are always learning but never able to come to full knowledge of the truth. So this is where we are. People who retain the outer form of religion but deny its power. So when people deny the power of God, and the primary power of God is this life-changing thing that we have just seen from Hebrews 12.
One thing that I've seen with all the attributes, it's as if it draws to the same thing. And when Moses was asking to see God and God proclaimed his name, all of those attributes seems to be drawing to the same thing of who the Lord said he is. That was very interesting to me, that all of it seems to be drawing to the same point.
And what's more, if you compare those things that we just worked through with the fruit of the Spirit, you probably have the same concepts. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, self-control. So Shaul, or Paul, in a certain sense, is actually referring to the attributes of God here.
Billy, I have a comment and then I have a question. So my first comment, I believe, was in the 6th attribute. I could be wrong. There was a statement made that he waits for his chosen, even through their wickedness. It was very comforting and a great piece that I can even add into when I'm speaking to those that are unfortunately going through it right now, and they don't understand why they're facing what they're facing, and they're choosing all the wrong things. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the chosen and how he waits for them?
Erg happy because that is he has a long nose. He has patience with us. When we are sinning and when we are living in our sin, he waits for us, and he's actually waiting for us with a yearning. You know, we often take the parable of the lost son incorrectly, I think, because the parable of the lost son, listen carefully, is the parable of the father who, rather than to live in a false relationship with his son, sends him to hell in the hope that he will see what he has and return to him. And that is very much what his grace is about. He allows us to wallow in our sin, and he continues to heap blessings on us in spite of that, exactly as that father did, in the hope that he will see his squalor, turn around and come back home.
My question is, I believe, was the 9th. It says, judge on character and not on deeds. Can you help me understand that?
People have wrongdoing in their past. And what he's actually pleading for is that we should not judge people based on their wrongdoings of the past, but that we should judge people based on their character. That we should study a person's character. We should see how he lives in the presence of other people. And only then will we truly know who and what he is. So we must never judge superficially. We must not judge on our perception of what a person is doing. Is actually what I'm saying more than one shouldn't judge the deeds. The perception of the deeds is what one needs to judge, because some things that people do and need to do are not evil, but they need to react to situations around them, and those reactions and those deeds that they commit will actually be very much along the line of the Father judging without any compassion. And he judges without any compassion for the unrepentant. And how do we judge without compassion for the unrepentant? Yeshua says to us that if you go to a town, take your peace with you.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do not receive your peace, take it back and leave with it. He also says, brush the dust from your shoes. This is the same concept, that if people do not accept the God that you have brought them, walk away from it.
Yes, I believe it was in the 8th attribute. I'm not too sure if it was 8th or 9th, but you were talking about a leveling that needs to take place. And it's not to say that it's not proper to have the wealthy and the poor, but there needs to be a leveling. Can you help us understand how we could help to increase the leveling?
We're starting to talk into something that can only happen in community, understand that. Because in any community, there will be those who actually are entrepreneurs and will reach more and will attain a lot. The hard workers, the people who can do. And then there will be people who do not have that ability, who are passengers to a certain extent, who are laborers and workers they're employed. And those who do things will commonly have much more than those who are employed and are laborers. So what this actually says is there needs to be a leveling, because we cannot have a situation where the poverty is not addressed. And the best way to address poverty is to create jobs. So to a certain extent, this is actually saying that don't amass your wealth. But then there also is a little bit of a silent thing that is not said, and that is that your wealth is meant for the well-being of the community. When you start looking at this, you start looking at a place such as Kwasisabantu. I believe you were there, were you not, Jennifer?
That's correct, yes.
At Kwasisabantu, the most affluent person is probably getting a menial salary. What is provided there is electricity, housing, food. You have to trust the Lord for the rest. Now, you know, they have the water factory there, and they have all of those magnificent farming activities that are going on over there. It brings in millions.
Right.
Normally, all of those millions would actually be swallowed by the people who are running the factories. But it doesn't happen there. All of those millions are actually going into the community. That does not mean that the people who are doing the hardest work are not rewarded and that they don't have better living circumstances than those who are just working. But they don't live in abject richness. What they have and the advantages they have, the better cars, the airplanes, all of that, is there for the community. It is not only there for their own use. And those people don't have large bank accounts.
Right.
It actually starts speaking into life insurance. It starts speaking into short-term insurance. It starts speaking into health insurance. Because when we look at all of these things, you actually find places where people are making excessive profit and are not power plowing anything back. Because for example, we know that insurance agents take the first year's commission home with them. Now, under present circumstances, or as things are, that would not be wrong. But that means that the affluence that they then have, they should be using to empower the really poor to be able to care for themselves. And this is what this is alluding to. It's not about giving it all away. It's about creating jobs for the poor.